Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, our terrific guest is an expert on religious nationalism and the war on liberal democracy, Katherine Stewart. Now remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. But now we're going to get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. In other exciting news, the documentary Carville, Winning is Everything Stupid, is now streaming on Max. Get updates and some great behind-the-scenes content by following James on Twitter @JamesCarville and on his new TikTok. Get this, his new TikTok @RealJamesCarville. You can also get text updates about what's next for Politicon and Politics War Room by signing up at Politicon.com. So tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And please check out the links to our sponsors, Magic Spoon and Miracle Made, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting these sponsors because it really makes this podcast happen. Hey, James, Trump has flooded the zone with one action after another, most controversial, more than a few illegal. This is purposeful. He wants to dismantle the American government and society as we know it. I mean, here's the critical point that everyone ought to realize. More important than anything else, Trump has contempt for the rule of law, unless it advantages him. A Reagan judge said his terminating birthright citizenship was blatantly unconstitutional. Firing all those civil service employees who have protection is going to be deemed illegal. The idea he can impound funds, the Supreme Court has ruled you can't. It even said that a line item veto, much more modest, wasn't constitutional. Trump doesn't give a damn about that. He's doing it to make a mark. He's doing it for several reasons. He does fancy himself as an Orban-type dictator. And some of these actions, he figures just could be upheld by that deeply partisan Supreme Court. He can count on 4 votes. All he's got to do is get a 5th. But finally, it's a diversion. He excites the MAGA base before he sells them out on taxes and immigration visas for high-tech workers. And the high-profile ICE raids, can you believe they have Dr. Phil, the faux doctor who peddles faux medicines, accompanying ICE on raids? They'll go into schools and churches, and, they're going to do some awful things. They're going to separate families. But the one thing he won't do, he won't deport 1 million migrants like he promised to do, or 10 million like he promised. So it's great to have Homan playing the tough guy out front, but these are diversions from his real policies for which he may well fail.
Well, all that is true. I guess what I'm sort of trying to concentrate on, what should the Democratic response be? Should we attack on all fronts? Should we attack on the legal criminality front? Should we, I don't know how you pass up Bobby Kennedy, Caroline Kennedy, putting animals in a blender. I don't know how you, I've always kind of been, since this took place, an advocate of patience, but I don't know how you can be patient in light of all of this. I just ask you this: is there some chance this thing just collapses? That it's just so illegal, so incompetent, so crazy that it doesn't work. I've never seen that before.
Well, it's not going to work. I mean, when you fire everybody who has competence anywhere, you know the kind of people he's bringing in. So ultimately, it's going to fail. Right. And ultimately, Trump figures, that's on his side. He can last as long as he wants to. But no, these are terrible policies, and they'll pay a price for them. It's just a case of when.
So there was a special, I don't know what it means. Maybe you can call Ann Zelta and ask her, in an Iowa Senate district that Trump carried by 21 or 23, and a Democrat won. Now, I don't know if it was special circumstances. I think there was a blowout somewhere in Minnesota. I don't know if this is special circumstances, if it indicates anything, but a 23, 25-point turnaround is a lot. And if you look at the polling, the public is kind of getting, I think they're going to salvo on this pretty fast. But I don't know, and I don't know how much, they're committing suicide. Well, should we have an assisted suicide with them? I don't know.
James, I hope you're right. I must tell you, the last cycle, I became a little bit skeptical of special elections as harbingers. Maybe I've overreacted that way. But look, I think, I read all these stories about how dispiriting, chaotic Democrats are. It's true. But it's also predictable. That's the way they were on January the 30th, 1973, 1981, or 2017. January 30th, 2017, Democrats thought, my God, what have we done? This election was a fraud, et cetera. So instead of spending all the time and energy assailing everything, pulling out of WHO was a terrible mistake. The demagoguery against trans people is sickening. Freezing funding for foreign aid is counterproductive. But, this is not what's on people's minds. And Trump doesn't give a damn. Little kids in Africa die because of this. Democrats need, and you said this, to focus on a handful of issues that directly go to his policies, his lack of integrity, and how they affect people. You mentioned raising the minimum wage. They're against it. Abortion may not have been a big deal in the presidential election. It's still a big deal, and he is going to go back on his campaign pledge to leave it to the states. Already, I saw Bobby Kennedy on Wednesday morning said, Trump has told me to look at the safety of the abortion pill. You know what that means. When that big reconciliation bill comes up and they propose huge tax cuts for the affluent, and they're going to cut Medicaid, they're going to cut food stamps. Those are issues. Drug prices. There's a bill which was enacted a couple of years ago where drug prices go down in a year or two, particularly for Medicare recipients. That's a good issue. Hold him to his pledge on inflation. I think actually Democrats have lots of opportunities as long as they realize he's going to dominate for the next couple of months.
I agree with everything you say. But if I say we should be patient, three more things come up. All right, he freezes every grant. Okay, they lay off, I don't know how many 100,000 federal employees. The Bobby Kennedy cats in a blender story from Caroline Kennedy, who you know her much better than I do. I think she's a very nice, solid human being. She wouldn't say anything like that.
Totally credible.
True.
Totally credible.
Yeah, I mean, in any interaction I had with her that has always been very pleasant, and you know her very well. You serve on that board. I know a lot of people that know her, and to a person, people speak very highly of her. I can understand why, but that destroying a pet in a blender. Okay, I mean, so how do you take that pitch? Now he's up for confirmation hearings. Going to be, but they just keep supplying. Every time you say we need to be patient, we need to just take our mark, rope-a-dope, don't go in. He does three other things that you go, God Almighty, man, look what this guy just did. And there was I highly recommend it. There was a piece in the New York Times, an op-ed piece by an economist. When I read it, I had the feeling she might be a conservative, but I don't know. And of course, this is my obsession. The bond market is starting to misbehave.
James, who wrote the piece?
And I can't remember her name, but it's prominent on the Times site. It's a kind of, as I recall, it's a Mary Smith.
Doesn't matter. It's the bond market.
It was a kind of. It doesn't matter, but and apparently she knows what she's talking about. Why it's so dangerous. And one of the things that we talk about, he doesn't do anything about prices that he promised to do something about. What's not going down? Maybe the most important price you have is the price of money. The price of money is not going down. If anything, it's going up. And of course, that's largely determined by the bond market. And, at some point, the government is going to pay more interest. People are not going to be able to buy a house. We've now had an all-time low in housing starts. My counsel. I know I said because I said the bond market was so powerful back in the early 90s.
You wanted it to adopt.
You know, shit, everything. Yeah. Yeah. But there's so much. I don't know. It's just overwhelmingly. And I don't think they can pull any of this off. I just don't think they have the confidence.
No, I agree with you.
And
they can't. You know, at this and look, when Bobby Kennedy comes up, Democrats ought to do what they're doing. They ought to oppose him. There's a chance he'll be defeated. There is a chance, you know, and there is a chance that Tulsi Gabbard will be defeated. I think it was unfortunate. The two people one who wasn't defeated, Pete Hegseth and Kash Patel, may not be defeated. Those are the two I'd most prefer to lose. But Bobby Kennedy and
Hegseth was dangerously close.
Yeah, he really was.
Supposedly, they gave Tillis a free ride in the primary and promised him a bunch of money. That's, I'm just repeating, be clear, I don't know this, but pretty substantial.
Well, on that cost, let me just tell Senator Tillis, if he gets his free ride, and if a certain Democrat named Roy Cooper decides to run against him, that free ride may not count for much. But,
it may not count. I agree.
You know, let me give you, you're right. It's hard not to get worked up. Let me give you, I mean, we focused on Hegseth and Patel and how awful some of the top appointments are. Let me give you one example of how bad it is. The U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia is going to be a guy named Ed Martin. He's a failed politician and a right-wing activist. This week, he sent out a memo saying to the whole staff, let's go after a former January 6th prosecutor, Ashley Akers. Why? She had the audacity to criticize Martin. So Martin said, let's get all of her, this is a private email which came out, let's get all of her records and emails. This is a private citizen, James, and whose only offense is she criticized Martin. And then he said, quote, we'll see if we can help her, end quote. I wonder what Mr. Martin meant by that.
So let me put on my very small, ill-fitting legal hat here for a second. I think in order to do that, they're going to have to go to a judge, all right, or magistrate. And they're going to have to show, I don't think even the Justice Department can just go willy-nilly and decide to go through somebody's emails. I think they probably have to establish some connection or probable cause. Now, you know, I guess if you shop long and hard enough, you can find a judge to sign anything, but that might be he might need just a little bit more. Yeah,
and I don't know if he was talking about her email. She was in the Justice Department. She resigned. But that wouldn't bother Mr. Martin. He doesn't care. I mean...
Well, I don't think he would either, but I mean, even in this darkest time, there's still a couple of hoops you got to jump through. I don't know. It's a good question. And then her Justice Department emails, do they belong to the Justice Department? Can they look at employees' emails at will? I don't know what the law is, so I should.
Well, I know less than you do, and I would only predict whatever the law is. They will stretch it, or if they have to, they will disobey it because they don't believe it that much.
They won't even look at it. Another thing, let me add, in the whole incompetence thing, the Speaker of the House is a massively weak, uncurious man. Okay, I don't think, you know, if we would have had this kind of situation, you had Pelosi, you had Schumer, you know, maybe even Hakeem, but at least there'd be some level of congressional talent. I don't see there's very much there, to tell you the truth.
The founders, you and I weren't around to do podcasts with them. God, would that have been fun. But the founders thought that the legislative branch should be the most powerful branch of government. Congress has ceded power repeatedly over the years. One can argue about what that balance should be. Trump wants to totally take it away. And if Republicans allow that to happen, I don't want any of them to say I'm an institutionalist, because that's what this is all about. And
so everybody should do themselves a favor. Read the 14th Amendment, and particularly the citizenship part of it. And also, while you're doing that, I think it's Article 1, I don't know if I'm the most conservative judge you can imagine. If I'm Alito or Thomas, or I'm even go to trouble, how do you get around the power of the congressional to appropriate money? I don't think. I would like to see. Pam Collin asked about the 14th Amendment. She said, well, there was an argument made because they're children of people that were here illegally. I don't know what it means. It's a very tenuous argument. It's not a very good one, but that's what the narrow string that they cling on to. But man, and the judge had just dismissed it. The language could not be any fucking clearer. I mean, they just can't. Even if you're for, most liberal possible interpretation you can come up with a law, this one doesn't leave any wiggle room.
Well, James, can I add something, which is, you're right, read the 14th Amendment, and then I want you to go, all of you people out there, and search and find testimony that was given in 1995 by one Walter Dellinger, our dear late friend, on birthright citizenship to the House Judiciary Committee. It is the most compelling, eloquent, forceful, it's absolutely clear what birthright citizenship is. And Walter laid it out, and anyone who reads that and reads the 14th Amendment knows what Trump is doing. I don't think he really cares, James. I think he just loves to throw that shit out, if you will. And, it distracts, it gets people going. And, as I say, he always thinks he has a shot to win. I mean, he comes in, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, man, they're in his pocket. So, he could win this.
Yeah, I mean, look, you learn not to say never when it comes to this. You just do. But they're so incompetent in so much of the gang that couldn't shoot straight. I'd love to have a 5-minute conversation with Susie Wiles, who doesn't have, I don't think has any experience to speak of in the federal government, but no one has any experience of dealing with this kind of clown.
She's obviously a very talented political person, but her only experience in Washington
seems to be a really good
low-level job with Jack Kemp many years ago. So I don't think she's the solution if people think she is.
Yeah, I don't either. You always kind of, something.
Well, James, I also get, I will read a column almost every day. Someone saying, a Democrat saying we ought to, try to work with him. Let's see if we can work with him. Somebody wrote in the Post the other day, he really, we're normalizing him now. That's good. He's no, I'm sorry. He's not normal. He is not normal. And if you want to work with Kash Patel, if you want to work with Pete Hegseth, if you want to work with the people surrounding him, go ahead. There may be an infrastructure issue or something that you can work with him on. But you wait till he proposes that budget reconciliation bill. That's the big one that's coming up. And the House may start on that as early as next week or the week after. And James, to get there, they're going to have to Medicaid. They keep thinking of as that's just a bunch of poor people. We can slash that. Well, it's not just a bunch of poor people. It's nursing homes. It's rural hospitals. And it's people making up to $43,000, $44,000 a year. And Trump carried people who made under 50. He only carried them by 1 point, but he carried them. There are a bunch of Trump voters in that. These guys they don't know the trouble that they're headed for.
They have no earthly idea. And they have and also they don't have any earthly idea of how popular Medicaid is. And, but again, it's just going to see, can they survive this? And you're right, when reconciliation comes, I don't know if there's any preparation for it. They got a uber thin majority in the House. And I think when the history is recorded from the election day through today, the people that are really going to look bad are the people that say, well, look, this is not the end of the world. Let's try to work with the guy. Or, you're overreacting to it. It's Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, I don't agree with him. I don't like him, but, maybe he'll change and we can do something great for America. Oh, God almighty. almighty. And I mean, we just got to keep writing the names down, like the Wall Street Journal editorial.
They've been good on
page.
some issues.
You know, so they've been good, but they were like, this is at the beginning. This is not the end of days. The John Fettermans of the world.
John Fetterman just wants attention.
I understand, but you know, I see a little bit of it. You know, Bill Maher. I'm tired of it. I just am exhausted. Maybe I mean, there's some kind of somewhat mainstream thought is we just got to deal with the situation that we have and try. There's no hope for that. None. And to believe that is just to deny history of who the guy is.
Yeah, I mean, if you think you can work with him, as I say, you can work with Kash Patel, you can work with Exet, you can work with unconstitutional orders, you can work with sending people into churches and schools to rip little kids out.
You know, every day he does it. He just gets crazier and crazier about a day. So if you try to ascribe any level of sanity to him, he's going to keep getting crazier. It just can't be any clearer. It can't be any clearer. This ball is moving every day.
Okay, we'll keep on this, James. And one thing we're going to keep talking about, you know, what Democrats ought to be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. You cannot underline every sentence, but you can highlight some.
Yeah, the problem is this: they keep adding stuff. Okay, and that's what gets. You're right. You can't underline everything. You know, law school, you start, all right, but they keep adding shit. And wherever you thought you were a week ago, it's gotten exponentially crazier. And I don't know how long that people can, you know, how strategic we can be if it's just fucking nutty. The other thing we should talk about is the Senate seats. I mean, the Gary Peters thing, I didn't know that was coming. I guess I should have been more on top of it. But the Michigan Senate seat's going to be huge.
I've got my Michigan candidate, James. We do. Come on, Mallory.
Michigan has become very interesting. And, you know, I like to, because you have a vacant Senate seat and you have a vacant gubernatorial seat. So there's a lot of jockeying for position going on.
And a couple competitive House seats, James.
Right. And it's, you know, Buttigieg is now living in Michigan. He's thinking about it. So a lot of other people are thinking about it. There's very talented lieutenant governor there. My dear friend, our dear friend, Show's dear friend, Senator Mallory McMorrow. I mean, there's all kinds of, Justin Benson is very nice, very competent Secretary of State, is running for governor. So we're going to have to keep a close eye here on Michigan politics. It could be pretty significant. And then, of course, everybody thinks there's going to be a Durbin will run for re-election in Illinois. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in Democratic politics right now. Start your day right with Magic Spoon. Yeah, first of all, it's good at breakfast, but I'll make the same point about this product, and it tastes good. And I'll view it as much an all-day snack as I do breakfast food. It's that tasty, and, you know, it's not like eating candy or something. I think it tastes better than most candy.
Yeah, I agree. If you've been listening to us for a while, you know that we're big fans of Magic Spoon's high-protein cereal. I like it. My grandson likes it even more. Now we have exciting news. Get this. Magic Spoon turned their super popular high-protein cereal into high-protein treats that are light, crispy, and taste just like the classic crunchy cereal bars. Magic Spoon's treats are delicious and have become our favorite on-the-go snack. James loves them after a run, and he'll even double down with a bowl of cereal while he's working. I have good news for you, James. You might be able to add in some more variety because Magic Spoon is also launching a brand new high-protein granola. True to the Magic Spoon promise, it's packed with protein, and it's so crunchy and sweet, it's perfect for breakfast or a snack or any time of the day, especially as a delicious pre-workout meal. Now let's get into the macros. Magic Spoon's high-protein treats are crispy, crunchy, airy, and easy way to get 12 grams of protein on the go. They come in mouth-watering flavors like marshmallow, chocolate peanut butter, and dark chocolate. Now, if you know me well, you know I'm going for the chocolate peanut butter every time, but it's up to you. Then Magic Spoon's brand new granola packs a punch with 13 grams of protein and 0 added sugar. They come in the delicious flavors honey almond and peanut butter. The crunch is so satisfying and feels great knowing that we're getting a big serving of protein and staying carb conscious while getting to enjoy Magic Spoon's great taste. Now, right now, we have a deal for you. Get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/war room, or look for Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. That's magicspoon.com/war room for $5 off. The link is in our show notes. Hey, James, as well as insightful politicians and political observers, we've had compelling authors on this podcast. In that very top tier is Katherine Stewart. We earlier talked about her book, The Power Worshippers, The Growing Clout of Christian Nationalism. She has impressively built on that with her new book, Money, Lies, and God. You can see it right behind her. So how the coalition of right-wing Christian nationalists and the greedy rich have teamed up. Katherine, when we talked last time, a year or so ago, we talked about the radical Christian nationalists and democracy, anti-democracy. They have grown, and they now have a huge foothold with the election and others. As you write in Money, Lies, and God, we really shouldn't be surprised because they told us what they were going to do in Project 2025.
Absolutely. They told us what they were going to do, and now they're doing it. A lot of the representatives and authors of different chapters of Project 2025 have been brought into the incoming Trump administration. They're among his many nominees. And a lot of the things that they've told us that they were going to do, they're actually implementing. So this is really a movement that has taken over the Republican Party. It's unfortunate that the guardrails have really fallen away. I think for many years, the Republican Party thought they could make use of this cohort because they turned out a reliable sector of the vote, but they really have overtaken the party at this point, and they're the ones driving the bus.
Well, it is, if you'll pardon the metaphor, an unholy alliance. These Christian nationalists who believe falsely that America was created as a Christian nation, and we have to make it that, and the super rich, who all they care about is government pads their pockets and takes care of their vested interest. It really is an unholy alliance, isn't it?
It is. You know, I titled my book Money, Lies, and God because first, money is a huge part of the story, which is, meaning vast concentrations of wealth have destabilized the political system in a number of ways that we could talk about a little later. Second, I talk about lies or conscious disinformation, propaganda. That's another huge feature of the dysfunction that we're seeing now in our political system. And number three, God, because the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement is Christian nationalism.
Well, and for the rich guys, it's not blessed are the poor, but blessed are carried interest or lower capital gains taxes. And so you enumerate how they fund some of these Christian nationalists with whom they have nothing in common.
That's right. In my book, I pay very close attention to the money people, a group I call the funders. These people are the beneficiaries of massive concentrations of wealth over 5 decades. And what they're really doing is investing their fortunes or a part of their fortunes in these anti-democratic projects. And
name a few of them, Katherine.
Yeah, people like I'm thinking of Tim Dunn or Barry Seid or the Corkeries or the Wilkes brothers or members of the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. There are so many of them. Here's the important thing about the funders. They're not any one type. Some are Catholic, some are evangelical, others are Protestant, some are Jewish, others are, frankly, quite atheistic. Religiously, they're really all over the place, but they agree on one thing, which is, they want to get policies that justify and increase their wealth. In order to do that, they feel like they need to crush liberals and liberalism and what they call the administrative state. So they will fund sometimes these sort of right-wing culture wars as massive distractions to get the rank and file on board.
Well, we call them Christian. I'm going to turn this over to James just a second. We call them Christian nationalists, but what you think they are really are anti-democratic fascists.
Well, actually, Christian nationalism, like authoritarianism, say, I think is better understood as something that happens to a political system rather than sort of a set of attitudes embraced by the rank and file. So it's something that doesn't necessarily start off as a full-fledged political program that receives majority support. So, I suggest that this program is more as a kind of pathology. What I mean to suggest is that it has many separate pieces and different interest groups, sometimes, frankly, working for different aims. They wouldn't all call themselves, they wouldn't say, I'm a Christian nationalist, but what they're essentially doing is rowing in the same boat. As it were. And that leads to consequences that I think many members of the rank and file who might not see themselves as Christian nationalists, but think they're voting to, say, protect the American family or end abortion or things like that, that's going to lead to so many outcomes that they might not really desire or want or even be prepared for.
James.
So Professor, I've read, I think credibly, but I'll get you to comment, that the most widely read historian in the United States is a man named David Barton.
Oh, James.
Okay.
James and Catherine on David Barton.
Okay,
Here
so what I read is there's some accuracy to that. Maybe you can share with us exactly the eminently qualified David Barton.
David Barton is a kind of pseudo-historian whose own work has been criticized many times by a number of conservative, historians at conservative Christian colleges. And he's come up with a kind of narrative of America as founded as a conservative, supposedly conservative Christian nation whose laws should be based on a very reactionary interpretation of the Bible, a very particular kind of interpretation. Right. And he's been known to make up quotes. His works have been, yeah. I mean, his work was voted.
Donald Trump's going to be shocked.
His work was actually voted by, I think, the History News Network as the least credible, one of his books, the least credible book in American history. One of his books was called The Jefferson Lies, in which he was basically lying about Thomas Jefferson. It was withdrawn by his publisher, a Christian publisher, Thomas Nelson Publishing, because they said it lacked in matters of fact. But that hasn't stopped him. And his sort of revision of American history is too valuable to the movement to discard simply because it's not true. But here's the thing about David Barton. He's not just a historian. He's very involved. He and now his son, Tim Barton, are very involved in the movement, the Christian nationalist movement, in multiple ways. In my last book, I referred to him as the Where's Waldo of the Christian nationalist movement. Do you guys have read that book, Where's Waldo, to kids? I mean, I've got kids, so Where's Waldo is on our bookshelf somewhere. And he just shows up everywhere. He's leading tours to the Capitol for pastors. He's running these education groups. He's raising money or, doing outreach for the GOP. He's just kind of everywhere. He's offering his opinions on how American history should be taught in American textbooks at the, Texas State Board of Education, where they come up with curricula that goes to other parts of the country. So he's a very influential guy.
So we have this mass movement. Okay. David Barton, I think, is just an entrepreneur and sees a way that he can make money and a lot of it here. But any of these people alarmingly talented that,
I just have to say, I'm not a professor.
Okay. All right. You're not a professor.
In our world, you might be, Catherine.
I'm a humble investigative journalist.
All right. Okay. All right. Investigative journalist. Any of them that you think are particularly able to pull some of this crazy stuff off?
How are they able to pull this off?
Are any of the people in this whole movement
Oh, are they
some
able?
of them like kind of talented people? I mean, not, but have some ability. Or is it just mostly a bunch of clowns like David Barton hustling money?
Here's the thing. I think that people in the sort of outside of the movement have really misunderstood how tactical, how well funded they are, how networked they are, how we've seen their successes. They've worked together to get a Trump elected. They worked together to hollow out the Republican Party and eliminate other guardrails. They've taken over really critical features of our court system. That sort of right-wing legal ecosystem has been built up over time, and they've very carefully put into place these sort of novel legal building blocks, which are intended to degrade or destroy the separation of church and state, and that's working out really well for them in many respects. They have achieved stunning successes, and just because they have different interests and ideas and say might not all get along at a party doesn't mean that each of these different sectors of the movement aren't contributing in important ways. And, the consequences today are frankly too dire to ignore. I don't think we can understand what's happening in our politics today without understanding this movement, how it works and some of its people.
So before I turn it over, the Catholics are particularly interested to me because I'm a cradle Catholic and educating Catholic schools. And I have some friends that bishops have called them to help them raise money. And they don't want to be for this, but they say we have to because they really fund a majority of the U.S. church.
Yeah.
And the bishops don't have much leeway.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, what's happened is a couple of things. American Catholicism is incredibly diverse, as we know. There are a large number of Catholics who emphasize the social justice. There's a sort of liberation theology element to it, and they really understand their faith is having to care for the least of these and help the poor and the like. But there's always been a sort of schism within the American Catholic Church, and even within the sort of hierarchy, there's been a schism because of there's a sector, of course, that is, I would say, while hardly progressive, they're more liberal on issues like environmentalism and care for the poor. But the hierarchy of the church has been really taken a hit because of all the scandals, the sort of child abuse and sex abuse scandals that have, taken so many people out of the faith or sort of diminished the credibility. And into that vacuum, at the same time, you have a sector of the laity that's extremely wealthy and very sort of aligned with the larger goals of the Christian nationalist movement. And they've sort of stepped in not only to influence the church directly, but also to create these outside organizations like the Eternal Net, EWTN, Eternal War.
Very familiar.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
Familiar.
It's kind of they call it the Fox News of the Catholic world, or other organizations that have really are trying to kind of influence the theology almost from the outside. And so you have a real effort to sort of drag sort of Catholic doctrine in a much more sort of pro-capitalist direction and also to sort of ignite those needless culture wars.
I was turning it over to Al. There's a large tradition of anti-democratic feelings in the church and see the syllabus of errors. Okay, and that hadn't totally gone away, and it's a mistake to think that they won't try to revive that. But anyway, go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that brings me to abortion, because Trump during the campaign said, we're going to leave it to the states. It's not going to be a federal issue. But these people, the Christian nationalists elected him. He got a huge amount of votes. He's got to give him something. And I saw that Bobby Kennedy in his testimony said, the president asked me to study the safety of the abortion pill. I think we know what they're going to conclude, Catherine, because these people are going to demand something, aren't they? They're not going to just let him get away with, we'll leave it to the states.
No, absolutely not. And Trump's pardon of nearly 24 really kind of violent anti-abortion activists was a kind of a reward in a way for their support for him. And they hailed those pardons as as precisely that. I try to go every year to March for Life, or Americans United for Life. It's one of their sort of conferences that they have around the time of March for Life. And they are not satisfied with leaving it to the states. They talk about banning all abortion from the moment of conception, which they defined as the moment of fertilization. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too technical here, but the way the medical organizations define it is implantation, not the moment of the sperm and the egg meeting. But that's what they believe. They believe that sort of diploid zygote has the absolute equivalent moral value of a baby. And that's an incredibly radical position. That's going to outlaw some of the most popular and effective forms of birth control. And they are not going to be satisfied at all with some states, having different, bans, and then other states sort of being more lenient. They really want to ban all abortion nationwide, or what they see as abortion nationwide.
The first step will be the pill. They're really going to go after the pill over the course of the next year.
They are.
Katherine, you earlier discussed the discipline, coordination, strategic talents, if you will, even, or messaging of the right wing, and the much looser, less coordinated opposition. There really is a mismatch there today, isn't there?
It really is a mismatch. There's nothing really on the equivalent. There is a religious, moderate and progressive movement. There are a lot of religious liberals and moderates who are forming organizations like Christians Against Christian Nationalism, the Baptist Joint Committee. You have groups like Vote Common Good. You have so many other organizations that are coming together and saying, this doesn't represent our faith. Faithful America is another one. But they don't have anywhere near the funding. They don't have anywhere near the coordination. They're really just kind of engaged in these sort of messaging initiatives to the degree that they can, but it's absolutely nothing compared to the organization of the religious right. So in December, I was at Turning Point USA's America Fest. Do you guys know what that is?
Oh, Charlie Kirk, yeah.
Yeah. It's 20,000.
Lots of great parties, right, Katherine? Lots of fun people.
Lots of fun people. It was a trip. 20,000 supporters, a hardcore of the MAGA movement. But the head of Turning Point Faith, who is this guy named Lucas Miles, he obviously sees liberal and moderate Christianity as incredibly dangerous and threatening. He calls it woke Christianity. He called it heresy. He said, we need to eliminate woke Jesus. I'm paraphrasing here just a little bit. We're going to eliminate, wokeism from the American public. And what counts as woke? He specifically named the social gospel. He specifically named the historical Jesus movement, liberation theology, and Black liberation theology. And he said, we need to decide which, I'm sort of paraphrasing a little bit, like which version of Jesus is the real Jesus, like acknowledging that there's these diverse interpretations. And he said he and 3,500 other pastors are forming a new Nicene Creed or council. He's referring to the 4th century gathering called by, the Roman emperor, who sort of wanted to solidify these sort of ideas of what Christianity really is. And so they sort of want to, he said things started to go bad in the 17th century. He actually said that. So they want to take not just American society back to what they see as an earlier time that actually never existed in the way they think it did, but they want to take, American religion back to a much, much earlier era, a time when you could just say, well, these are the hierarchies in society, and these hierarchies are ordained of God.
Katherine, I'm going to turn this back to James to close it, but, amid all this, and particularly with what you just said, you're an optimist. You really think that the good folks, if you will, you notice I didn't say good guys, the good folks can win because most of us are pro-democracy. I worry.
Yeah, of course, I worry too, but I know that it's possible because I think more Americans would prefer to live in a democracy as imperfect as it may be, but a democracy with some accountability and a rule of law and some personal freedoms and principles of equality and accountability than want to live in some sort of authoritarian theocratic state that with, where the emperor is completely, the authoritarian leader is completely unaccountable and uses the government to pursue his political enemies while fleecing the pockets of the working class and the middle class. Right. So I think that if there is will to get it done, it can be done. Look, we've got elections in 2 and 4 years. We have to remember the country didn't go MAGA. If you look statistically, Trump won by a really small margin across several states. And he didn't win because he got more support. He won because there was sort of reduced support on the Democratic side. There was reduced voter turnout.
He won because of Joe Biden. But James, go ahead. Close it up.
So Gary Wills, who I think is a foremost Catholic theologian, commentator of modern era, wrote the following sentence: the social gospel, comma, which is the gospel, comma, okay? There's really no gospel outside of that, particularly in the synoptic gospels. But so there's a giant race to capture history. All right, and I go back when I was an undergraduate a long time ago in the 60s. I had a particularly good history professor who would tell a story about the little girl that came home from Sunday school in Richmond in the 1930s and says, "Mama, I forget, was General Lee in the Old Testament or the New Testament?" Okay, that's the power of history. And you remember the Dunning School, which at Columbia, which would crank out all of this idiotic lost cause nonsense. But when you capture it, that was with us for a long time, which was just totally made up by Jubal Early. So it's something to be scared of. I promise you, it should not be discarded as some minor thing. They're trying to rewrite history.
They are absolutely trying to rewrite history. And if you look at the people who are really funding this thing, and the amounts of money are extraordinary. I mean, what's in it for them is really straightforward. They want to have their wealth validated and increased while they're here on Earth. I think some people don't realize, like, the kind of information bubbles that the leadership of this movement and the funders live in. They're also really afraid of a population, not only that's going to sort of live in ways that they see as licentiously, but also they're really afraid that they're going to, look at their power and wealth and, say that's not right, that's amoral, and come after them with metaphorical pitchforks. And I think that fear is what's justifying their moves to destroy basic democratic institutions, to rewrite, to reframe the religion around their political goals. I think it's hard to overstate the degree to which the politics leads the religion in this instance.
Well, first of all, I appreciate your scholarship and your investigative journalistic abilities. And, I would just say this: the fight over history is never over. You think we've settled something? We have not settled it. Okay? Now, I mean, they're starting to reevaluate. Look at Elon Musk. You got a guy like endorsing the alternative for Germany? I mean, this history is not decided at all.
It's not. It's absolutely not. But we have to remember that in 2020, the MAGA movement didn't crawl into their beds and suck their thumbs. They vowed to get out there and do better. And, we wouldn't wish to emulate their most craven tactics, but we would do well to acknowledge that their determination has actually...
Well, they didn't, as you pointed out, and it's very correct, it wasn't that they did better, we did worse. We thought, we're taking care, we've done that, and let's move on, and I don't like the price of eggs or some nonsense like that. But anyway, I can't thank you enough.
Okay, everybody out there, Money, Lies, and God by Katherine Stewart. You owe it to yourself. Get it. It's an incredibly important book. It's worrisome but it's incredibly prescient, and I want you to go this week and make sure you get it. Money, Lies, and God, Katherine Stewart. Katherine, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sleep better with Miracle Sheets. It's unbelievable, and it's also in the summertime, it's invaluable. But yes, in particularly like if your spouse or your whatever likes it warmer than you do, this can save your marriage to some extent because you're going to sleep cooler. So it's actually good for marital harmony.
Well, we all certainly want that because sleeping at the right temperature is a critical way to feel rested the next day. If you wake up too hot or too cold, we highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Miracle Made sheets are inspired by NASA, and they use silver-infused thermoregulating fabrics. So you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long, no matter how high the heater is set. Plus, the silver lining prevents 99.7% of bacterial growth, which means Miracle Sheets require 3 times less laundry because they stay clean and fresh 3 times longer. Your bed will feel freshly made every night. Stop sleeping on bacteria that can clog your pores and cause breakouts and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle instead. Trust us, with no more gross odors, life is a whole lot better for your household. The NASA-inspired temperature-regulating silver-infused fabrics truly give you maximum comfort in any weather, and they make pillowcases and comforters also. Join us in getting better sleep every night. Not only are Miracle Sheets luxuriously comfortable, they don't have the high price tag of other luxury brands. Miracle Sheets feel nicer than bed sheets used by some 5-star hotels, so it's a vacation every time you get in bed. Upgrade your sleep this year. Go to trymiracle.com/warroom to try Miracle Made sheets today. Whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo War Room at checkout, so you'll get a free 3-piece towel set and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's back with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/warroom to treat yourself. Thanks, Miracle, for sponsoring this episode. Also, look for the link in our show notes. Hey now, James, for the outrage of the week. The selections are so plentiful, it's hard. But House Speaker Mike Johnson, who says he's advised by the Lord, apparently was told by the Almighty to ban trans persons from certain bathrooms. This was after Delaware elected to the House Sarah McBride, who is trans. Last week, thanks to reporting from Bloomberg's Billy House, we learned that Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace, congresswomen and self-appointed anti-trans police, claim Paul Revere came out of the bathroom in the Capitol warning there's a trans in the ladies' bathroom. They thought it was McBride. Turns out it wasn't. She has respectfully agreed to abide by Johnson's bigoted new bathroom rule. You know, Boebert and Mace seem fixated on matters sexual. Boebert, a Colorado representative, was evicted from a Denver theater last year for vaping and groping her date. South Carolina's Mace told a prayer breakfast that she passed up sex that morning so she wouldn't be late. The only person with any dignity in all the story is Congresswoman McBride.
I'm not going to top that because the absurdity and ridiculous of it needs to just stand on its own. I mean, I don't know. One day somebody's got to explain these people to me because I just don't understand it. I really don't.
Hey there, I'm Kimberly Atkins-Storr. With the new administration, a lot will be changing, and it's a lot for us to learn about. If you want to learn about the 14th Amendment and what that means for things like birthright citizenship, please listen to my podcast, Justice by Design. The link is in the show notes. And this week and every week, we are breaking down solutions and answering questions that you may have about how the world works in 2025 and beyond. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and it's linked in the show notes.
All right, now for our listener questions. Got a lot this week. Lindsay in Atlanta, Georgia. James, you've said that you hope your documentary inspires others. But what's the place for regular people like me at the table in a future Democratic Party?
Well, first of all, you have to make your place at the table. I mean, nobody's going to, and you got to decide what tables you want to make. Look in Georgia, I think opportunities, the party's obviously doing a little bit better. We've got competitive, really competitive presidential state, competitive Senate races now, which you didn't have before. But you got to make your own. You got to make your own music. I don't have any other way to say that. And docile people, but that's fine. But you're not going to make your own ways. But there are plenty of opportunities to be involved in Atlanta, and you got municipal politics, statewide politics, federal politics, all kinds of things. So
you're going to have a gubernatorial and a senatorial race in Georgia next year.
You got a lot. You got a lot on your plate. If you're Democrat, you live in Utah, you don't have that much to do.
Yeah. Pete in Raleigh, North Carolina says, why did clearly illegal actions by President Trump carry any weight at all? If Trump has no authority to fire a civil servant, why doesn't that worker just go to work the next day and put the ball in Trump's court instead of having to run to a federal judge for help? Because the Trump thugs would throw him out of the office. On these issues, you have to go to the courts. Pete, you're right. A number of these actions are clearly illegal. And again, I quoting James Carville, I'm afraid that some of these people are just going to have some patience because ultimately they're going to win.
Yeah, and to use the word legal in Trump in a sentence is, what do you call it, an oxymoron? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah,
one and a half things to do with the other.
John in Chicago. John's a regular, but he always asks good questions. John says the DNC has been criticized, James, for its location in Washington. If it were up to you, where would you move it? You can't say New Orleans.
I never thought about it. And I don't think there's much other. I mean, you have it there because that's where the Democratic Congress is, the congressmen, the senators. It's where interest groups you got to raise money from. I'm not a big fan of Washington think, but I don't think it. There are a lot of things the DNC could or couldn't do or should do or shouldn't do, but I don't think moving from Washington is very high on that list. I'll be honest. I mean, I appreciate the question. And I understand where you're coming from. I do think it's important to get these campaigns out of Washington and out of proximity to Washington, but that's a little bit of a different question.
It is different. I agree with you on both points. Ken in Syracuse, New York, says tariffs, deregulation, and other regressive and nationalistic policy decisions, combined with our inept federal government, threatens to bring our nation into a painful economic downturn. Is this our chance? I think he means the Democrats to take back the economy. Ken, you bet. Trump is going to have two choices. He's either going to go through with what he's talked about, which will cause a terrible economic dislocation, or he'll renege, which is what I think he'll do. But he's still going to cause problems. I think the Democrats last year really, they almost forfeited the economic issue, and that is insane. And this time, I think they ought to hit it. They ought to hit it hard starting now. He said he's going to lower food prices. When? How much? What's the inflation rate? What's the unemployment? There's something called the misery index. We know what it was on Election Day 2024. Let's see what it is in 26 and in 28.
Yeah, it's all a good point. I'll go back to recommend the article in the New York Times today on the bond market. The bond market is the great enforcer out there, and it's getting ready to get its paddle out. Mm-hmm. And when it starts spanking, it's going to hurt a lot of people. But they're not moving on these interest rates. We got to, this thing I don't think is going to work, and we got to be there to pick up the pieces.
Our next question comes from Quaid in Richmond, Virginia, who says, if birthright citizenship were to no longer exist, on what grounds do I or either of you hold citizenship? What then is its basis, James?
Well, I don't know. First of all, Richmond's one of my favorite cities. I love Richmond. It's a much more interesting place than people think. Well, first of all, if you end it, you pretty much start the end of the Constitution, because I go back to what I would urge everybody to do is read the actual language of the 14th Amendment. So if you can work around that, working around the First Amendment, free speech and freedom of press, that's not going to be a hard free religion. Forget that. The Constitution, we just think it's all chiseled in stone and we're all protected by it. And it's no, they don't give a shit. And when you start with birthright citizenship, you know you're going to freedom of press, you know you're going to freedom of religion.
Of course you are.
You're going to all of these places, and don't take this shit for granted, dude. Don't take it for granted.
Well, couldn't agree more. Richard in Salisbury, Maryland, says the legacy media is complicit in the lies the Trump administration tells. Is it because they think being part of the team is cool, or are they just too damn lazy? No, it's neither. But I think some are intimidated. I mean, we've seen the dreadful settlement that Disney and ABC made in a defamation case that they couldn't have lost, I don't think. I saw this week, I don't really know Jim Acosta of CNN, but he was an aggressive, tough reporter in the Trump years, and he was just basically shoved out. I mean, they moved into the midnight time slot. That's not exactly prime time. So he left. We have seen, sadly, that a number of talented reporters have left the Washington Post because they believe that the owner, Jeff Bezos, is more interested in being buddy-buddy with Trump. I hope that's not true. So I think the media has never had a greater challenge than right now, at least in modern times, and they have to step up to it because someone has to hold these people accountable. And that's the role the press is supposed to play.
So I did also address, I don't have no interest in getting in the middle of CNN's internal decisions or anything like that. They were very good to our movie, so I feel very, very kind to them. Having said that, I've done Jim Acosta's show on numerous occasions, and I find him to be a very straightforward guy, a very honest guy, and I'm sure that he's going to have a bright future wherever Jim Acosta goes. So,
yeah.
I very much like him. It's not in my business. What Trump is doing and what's happening in businesses, it's just as old as it is. I would prefer not to break your windows, but I may have to. And these companies have boards, they have shareholders, they got 1,000 things they got to do. And he's a mob boss. The trauma Disney went through earlier in Florida, and I'm sure that a lot of these CEOs, these big hedge funds or these pension funds or these huge institutional investors are like, hey, man, you got to be careful. There's no way that we can take a kind of loss on this. So I have some sympathy. I mean, they're not very courageous, but they don't want to get their windows broken. And it doesn't matter if you run in the corner delicatessen or you run in a Fortune 25 company, you're susceptible to be shook down, and they're getting shaken down.
Yeah. I tell you what they all should do. They all should go watch a movie that was, 20 years ago called The Post. And it's about the Washington Post and the Pentagon Papers. And it was the decision that Katherine Graham made. They were going public at the time, and their lawyers and their Wall Street advisors said, if you get involved in a big controversy, this could really, really just kill this public offering, or at least dampen it, and you're going to lose a lot of money. And Katherine Graham had to make a decision. You either go with Ben Bradley and the reporters and write about aggressively the Pentagon Papers, or you go with the lawyers and the bankers who said, man, stay away from this. She made the right decision. The Post did incredibly important stories. They flourished in the times afterwards, and there was a movie made about her. I'll tell you this much. There's no movie that's going to be made 20 years about people who shrank and were cowardly. No one's going to say, man, look at that decision that Disney made in 2024. So it's a matter of whether you really believe in an aggressive First Amendment or not.
Yeah, I think I'm going to disagree with you slightly. When that decision was made in 1972 or 73, it was a kind of family-owned operation. It was a closely held company, right?
Right,
Amazon.
But they were but they knew that in order to prosper, they had to go public. They couldn't stay private, okay. And this public offering was their biggest deal.
But right now, to say the least, Amazon is a public company.
Right.
Okay? And they're much, much more susceptible to pressure than the Washington Post was in the early 70s. And that's true. When you have all of this mega corporate ownership, they're very susceptible to pressure. And so the Amazon people say, geez, the Postal Service, could screw us, the employee regulations. There's 1,000 ways that the federal government can get back at Amazon if they don't comply. And that's the danger of this huge corporate ownership of all of these media entities. We let it happen, because it needed it. The price of the asset would go up. The more people that would bid on it. The Times has been able to stay a pretty much, family-run business. But the networks, the Post, a lot of these people are really, really subject to outside, let's just say it mildly, outside pressure. And that's a problem, a big problem.
Yeah, I would refer everyone to, there's a Columbia Journalism Review piece by Norman Pearlstein a couple of weeks ago on the billionaire owners, and it goes to James's point. And, if they can't stand up, then they shouldn't be in the business. And, because it's,
we got shareholders.
Well, then, goddamn it, don't own a newspaper.
Right, I agree, but they can make money. Look, I think it's a lot of the decline in journalism is attributable to corporate ownership because they too many pressure points. But I don't.
Well, I certainly think that's a factor, and I think it's going to get worse with some of the things that Disney and others have done, which has a chilling effect, particularly on small newspapers, which have been folding.
Well, it's like your friend
anyway.
Senator John McCain said, it gets dark, and then it gets really dark.
It gets really dark, right. All right, keep those emails and letters coming in. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. As always, send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Now, following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsors, Magic Spoon and Miracle Made, in our episode show notes. We thank you for supporting them because when you do, it helps make this podcast happen. Now, keep up with us. Subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com. James and I are constantly adding new content, so go and take a look. You also can find other shows you might enjoy on the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. And please remember, rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.